Hi, my name is Raj Raghavan, and we are going to talk today about personal leadership and why I think personal leadership is a very important component of our overall HR leadership. Before I get there, I want to introduce myself. I lead the human resources at Indigo, India's largest airline by number of passengers flown. I've been in this role for a little over 2.5 years. I came here March 2018, and prior to this, all my work experience was predominantly with multinational companies. Prior to Indigo, I did a little over 7 years at Amazon. At Amazon, I started as the India country leader, HR leader that is, and I did that role for probably about 3-4 years. Then I got Asia added to it, and in about a year's time it was Asia Pacific, and then it was also Middle East. So when I left Amazon, I used to lead HR for Asia Pacific and the Middle East region for the international consumer organization as well as the technology centers in the region. It was excellent. I got to know a lot of people of various nationalities. I got to work with a variety of different businesses, launch businesses in brand new countries, acquire businesses specifically in the Middle East, and that was all fun. Prior to that, I used to work for GE. GE was a fairly long stint. I started with GE Capital International Services, which is currently Genpact. I did a variety of roles at GECIS, that's what they were called before. Then I moved to the Global Research Center of GE, which is based at Niskayuna, New York. I was based in Bangalore at the John F. Welch Technology Center, and kind of responsible for HR for all the technologies that GE had on the technology and research side. So just as a context, the Global Research Center in Bangalore used to have about 5,000 employees, and I think more than half of them were PhDs, and people like me kind of brought the intellectual curiosity down a little bit. That just fun and humor if it lands right. And prior to GE, I had worked in Unilever and Ford Motor Company, and as I said before, I really wanted to work in an Indian company. So when I turned 50, which was a few years ago, I said to myself, the last decade or so of my HR professional experience had to be with an Indian company or a regional company, let me put it that way, where I can be a more active player in terms of making decisions for people. So one thing led to another. I happened to meet the then CEO of Indigo, and then I came on board, which is where I am right now. So let's go talk about why I think personal leadership is important. So let's now start discussing why I think personal leadership is a very, very important component of overall HR leadership, or for that matter, any leadership. So the key is to be able to get to some experiences that build resilience in my mind pretty early in life. Because if you don't get to that kind of experience early, it'll start coming in much later. And my sense is unless you are really, really ready to go face those things at such later part of your life, and I'm not necessarily talking about career, it then becomes slightly different and difficult. Let me cut to the cheese and get to what I think are some components of personal leadership that are important, irrespective of whatever stage of your career that you are in. For me, as soon as I graduated from Madras School of Social Work, which is where I did my master's in personnel management, I went to start working for Eureka Forbes. And I did about 2 years at Eureka Forbes, leading HR in a company that was only full of salespeople. And for them to get a bit of understanding, and for me to also say what makes sense for hardcore salespeople from an HR standpoint beyond just recruiting was a little difficult. It took a few months for me to realize there are probably parts of learning and development that HR can influence beyond just recruiting. What does that mean? And there it's not about PowerPoint skills, it's about selling skills. How do you make selling skills much easier to learn was what something I ventured into, and that actually happened due to serendipity. So there used to be a conference, an annual conference at Eureka Forbes, and in that conference, and this was a conference of salespeople who had achieved a certain level of targets, one of them stood up and asked the managing director, you know what, we all go and sell door to door, but we don't really get trained very well. And the managing director looked at us and said, you know, can you guys do something about this? And that's when we started the first ever time, I think, and this was many years ago, of interactive sales training packages. Of course, there were no computers then, so you couldn't really go click a button and then move to a new screen. So we had to shoot different scenarios. So we used camera people, we used scripts almost like a movie, and we went and shot scenarios of how do you go door knock, how do you face a rejection, how do you close a sale, how do you actually collect money, and so on and so forth. All of these things, we were doing pretty much for the first time. So in all of our careers, we are probably going to get to do things which we have never done before. And Eureka Forbes gave me a great orientation towards it. From there on, I moved to Unilever. And my first role in Unilever was a factory personnel manager. And one of my key learnings there was what I learned in management school is great, but theory is only so much that can get you where you want to go and practice at work. And I'm not going to belabor all my experiences in a factory, but I had to, to be introduced to a very tough industrial relations situation when I had hardly worked in a factory, and this was about a couple of unions in the same factory, and how my manager really backed me in terms of how we could go face some of those situations. And these situations are unique. You're not going to learn them in school. You're probably not even going to learn them at work. And what you learned at certain workplace can't be completely transformed and transported to another workplace. Let me now talk a little bit about how careers pan out. And in a long career, and my career, much like Anil's, is about three decades right now. And you will have failures, you will have successes. It's often very easy for us to be so happy about our successes that we fail to learn from successes. So it's important to learn from success as much as it is important to learn from failures. But I think what you learn from failures is more important, because you will not probably repeat that again. And let me give you one example. This was many years ago when I was with Ford India, and the role that I had was that of a launch training manager. The launch training manager in an automotive factory has a very interesting role. The first role is to put together selection processes and how to select people, and then training processes, how to train people to an extent that you see a sheet of steel going into a factory, and that comes out of the factory gate as a complete manufactured automobile. And so we were launching the Ford Motor Company's factory in Chennai. In fact, the business itself in India for the first time, and we had the first set of Ford Escorts being manufactured at the Mahindra facility back in Nashik. So we learnt a lot from there, and then we were going and building this brand new greenfield site in Chennai. Obviously you had to go hire people, and I was the launch training manager. I was trained extensively outside of India. I visited Dearborn, Michigan, the headquarters of Ford Motor Company. I was on launch at Vietnam, at Thailand. So there was a lot of learnings that I had. And then we had to go hire this first group of electrical technicians. And the reason we had to hire them then was they had to be put on a plane going to Melbourne, Australia to get trained on the various electrical systems. So the hiring timeline was very important. So we went there. We had invited almost like 200 people to come in and interview with us over 3 days' time. Day one happened, and we had interviewed about 50-60 people then. We hired nobody. Day two happened. At the end of the day, we hired nobody. Day three happened. Till half day on day three, we had hired nobody. And I said, what are we doing something here? We are probably not getting anywhere, and we are going to miss the timeline. And that's when I called my boss. Anto Vincent is his name. He's still a good friend of mine. And so I called him and I said, Anto, we are probably messing this up big time. We are not able to hire anyone at all. He said, Raj, why didn't you just stop this recruiting right now? Come back, think through what you're not doing right. And then let's go figure out, because you can continue doing this for 5 days and you will still not find it right. And that was a fantastic piece of advice. I came back, and it so happened that I chatted up with Dr.HR Kamalanaban, who used to be a professor at IIT Madras. Unfortunately, I have not been in touch with him for a long time. So if in case he sees this video, I just want to say hello to him. And the conversation I had with him was something like this. I said, Kamal, what do you think we are doing wrong? He said, why don't you come to the lab? Let's chat. And then he took me to another colleague of his who was an electrical engineering professor. He looked at those questions and he said, so Raj, what are you trying to hire? Who are you trying to hire? I said, we are trying to hire electrical technicians. What kind of background? Probably an ITI or a diploma. He said, do you know what you're doing? These questions are for master's level electrical engineering students. You're never going to have an ITI or a diploma in mechanical engineering solve these questions, because it's not about experience you're asking theoretical questions. So that was a big revelation for me. I thought, I had got this extensive training all across the world so I can come and implement it, not quite realizing I'm asking somebody a PhD level question when I need only a 10 standard pass. So I've been keeping that experience back in my head when we went and developed extensive selection processes, be it at GECIS, Genpact, which is now called the way it is, or in HSBC, or later in Amazon. One of the things I always realized was, do we understand what problem to solve? And I think that's a key question to ask in terms of leadership. Do you understand what problem you want to solve, so you can go figure out what the solution for that problem should be? It was very nice to reminiscence how initial failures will actually help you as you move along your career. The only thing I would say is, don't get too cut up about your failures. You're going to fail often. In a long career, it's never going to be a path like this, right? It's going to be probably a zigzag path, and never decide your performance by just one failure. Move on, learn from them, and don't forget them. Don't make the same mistake again, is the only takeaway I have. Beyond that, as an HR partner, what has helped me be successful? I think a big component of that would be for you to know your core business. Oftentimes, HR leaders tend to think our role is to coach, to be able to consult, to be able to put together compensation plans, to be putting together learning and development plans. But none of these things will come in handy if you don't understand your business. So spend the time understanding your business. Go spend the time on the field. At Amazon, we used to have this methodology called a launch plan. This was a personal launch plan. So for example, when Amazon hired me in 2011 March as the India HR leader, I had a 90-day launch plan. And that included a variety of things, including sitting in the customer relations team and listening into calls. And later we extended that to actually delivering stuff. And that time we did not have Amazon.in. We had programs of how you go deliver to people and how you actually go work in the fulfillment station. In fact, there was a program that was called Associate Experience Work Week. So every year as an Amazon leader, you had to spend one full week in a fulfillment center, aka warehouse. And I call that my annual weight reduction exercise, because you pretty much walk 20 kilometers a day. But what that gave you was the sense of how business got run. Beyond that, you sat in reviews, you understood how data was used. So to an extent that I would say, if your leader thinks if he or she is unwell and she comes and says, Raj, I'm unwell, I can't do this review, can you go do that review on my behalf? And that is when I think you've earned the stripes. Oftentimes it is the CFO that gets called to do these kind of things, or your strategy officer or your sales leader. If an HR person can go stand up, do a business review on behalf of the business leader, that's when I think you've arrived. And I think that's a big part. The second part, I think, is you need to understand technology. Irrespective of what kind of business that you are in, if you're in a technology company, you better understand what technology that it works on. If you're in an airline company that I'm in, let us understand what the technologies that are being used in order for the airline to be running profitably and sustainably. And this means you need to have the curiosity. Have the curiosity to understand how automation works. And how automation works then needs to get translated to how automation can work within the HR stream. And one of the things I learned at Amazon, and there was this colleague of mine called Mike Reynoldsson, who used to run HR shared services across Amazon. He would tell me only one thing, Raj, my view of life of HR shared services is that anything a machine can do should never be done by a human being. And I thought that was phenomenal, because a lot of times we get a self-importance when somebody comes and asks you a question. Where do I go find my leave data? What is this policy? Why can't we just automate all of them? And most companies are doing it now. All I'm saying is, let's understand automation to the extent that we can understand AI and machine learning. How can we use AI and machine learning to make decisions? How can we supply training data to machines so they don't get biased? Now, machines don't get biased themselves. It's human beings that add their biases into machines. The point I'm making is that do we have enough understanding of data, automation, AI and machine learning to be able to teach machines in a way my own biases don't go impact the way the machine makes those decisions. I want to bring this section to a closure by sharing with you what are some key personal contributors for success, and that goes beyond your area of core competence. This is not about how much of Industrial Disputes Act 1947 I understand. This is not about how much of a HR techie I am. It's about certain personal things. One of the things I heard, and it still rings in my head, is what Jeff Bezos once talked about. And he said that I understood very early in my life, it is easier to be smart than to be kind. I'm not going to be telling you the same story, because the way he would say it is far more effective. So go probably to YouTube or to a Google and type Jeff Bezos speech at Princeton University graduation, and he will be able to reel out to you exactly in his own way why it is easier to be smarter than to be kind. Why am I saying this? We all are running behind smarts. Smartness can be acquired. It can be acquired by going to fantastic schools. I myself, beyond my master's in Madras School of Social Work, I went to INSEAD, then I went to Wharton to do my Global Fellow program. Right now I am doing my Executive Doctoral program at the Indian School of Business. These all increase my smarts. But what am I going to be remembered much later in life is kindness and compassion. And I think when you're leading people, and this comes to us quite naturally, even if we are not people leaders, because we are helping people leaders. When you're leading people, you will see different faces of people all in one day. Don't get consumed by this complexity is all I would say. Because sometimes people would say, well, I was told I'm such a good performer. Today I'm told I'm not. The point is, they're going to come and say, you were a fantastic HR leader one day. Tomorrow they're going to say, well, you are an apology for an HR leader. My point is, can you learn something out of it? Can you have the compassion? And I will go beyond just empathy, because to me, compassion is a far more compelling word than just empathy, because empathy would just mean putting yourself in the other person's shoes. But compassion means bringing the whole of you to let the person know that you're the most important person for me as I have the conversation. There are simple ways of doing it. The things that I do is when I have a one-on-one conversation, I keep my phones on silent mode. I won't answer the phone irrespective of who calls me. I won't be looking at my laptop screen, because oftentimes when there is a new email that is popping up or a new chat message that is going, you're going to get diverted to that. I won't answer my other phone calls. Even if it is 20 minutes, my focus is just on that person. And that's what a lot of people remember. They say that you're a great listener, Raj. And I don't make a lot of effort to listen because I genuinely want to listen to people. The other thing I always tell myself is, when I listen, I'm not listening to respond to you. I'm listening to understand you. And I think that's going to be some real good determinants of a great HR leader. And finally, I want to say, you need to be able to understand your vulnerabilities. You need to be able to understand your weaknesses. You need to be able to appreciate your weaknesses, much as you need to be able to appreciate your fear. In my mind, and like Thich Nhat Hanh, the most famous Vietnamese Buddhist monk, would say, if you don't embrace fear, you will never be able to overcome fear. And my takeaway from that is, if I don't embrace my vulnerabilities, if I don't embrace my weaknesses, I will never be able to overcome them. Thank you so very much, Anil. Thank you so very much, Dr.HR. Thank you so very much for listening in, and hopefully I made some difference to you in the last 20 odd minutes that you and I were chatting.